Hello and welcome back to KSP POV, where we play Kerbal Space Program in first person. In the last episode, we raised a whole bunch of money because the episode before that we designed a space station to orbit around Kerbin for a little while, and then we're going to send it to the Mun, and we're going to start collecting all the science that we can get. The total cost for all of the different launch vehicles is going to be $1.9 million, and so it is going to be the biggest undertaking we've done in this series so far, in both seasons actually. So let's get started. So first we're going to go into the VAB and we're going to load up the centerpiece, the core of our space station, which is the mobile processing lab and the viewing cupola and the solar panels, the generators, everything that we need to just be a stable first part of our station. As you can see here, we have our long arms that contain both the communication dishes as well as the solar panels. We have those on hinges, and that's going to become very important in the coming moments. But first things we want to do is start testing. We want to run simulation programs to make sure that this rocket can get into orbit. It's very expensive, and we're going to be filling it with several Kerbals, so we don't want to lose lives. But of course, with the crash mud, every simulation costs money. So we get it out onto the launch pad, and immediately we start noticing a problem, and that is some rapid shaking here. This is not a glitch, this is not a bug. This is telling us that the Kraken is near and has got us in our gaze. So we try to just ignore it and load up the screens as we need, and we're going to just try to use MechJeb to ascend automatically. So skipping ahead just a little bit here, we already launched and we already staged our lower boosters, but the entire time the craft was shaking back and forth fairly violently. And I'm trying to tip over, but it was fighting me the whole way. And then by the time it does start to tip over, I can realize that this is going to be a bad launch. This is not looking great, and all that money that we spent was worthless except for the fact that it told us that this isn't a safe craft to fly. Tipping over even more, and we used MechJeb's auto ascent, but as you can see here, it's not following by the parameters. I try to change it a little bit mid-flight and end up leaning backwards. And we're shaking around, and we start drifting off course. And what's happening here is that the arms of the space station were rattling around with enough force that it just tore us all apart. So that's not going to work. So we go back to the VAB and we decide we need to strut this a little better. We have already auto-strutted, but let's just throw on some physical struts there just to keep everything attached and in line. We attach struts to the arms, and we make sure our staging is correct and our action groups are correct. Throw on a couple more. Then I realized we didn't put any experiments on here, and even though it's just going to be taking the experiments from a lander, might as well have something on there, right? It's just wasted space if not. But of course I forget to put those on action groups, so there's that. I try to make a fun little staging so the copula can be seen or can be used in flight and see through the windows, but it's not going to work. So here's test 2. And once again, we're adjusting our parameters in MechJeb. And then suddenly we see an explosion and some more shaking. So already this test has failed. And so I realized that the shaking might have something to do with the fact that it's just sitting on its engines on the launch pad. So we throw some launch clamps in there. And then we try the autopilot launch again, and instantly another explosion from the arms. So can't really launch with an explosion right off the get-go. So I get rid of the launch clamps, and I get rid of the fairing. And I try just one launch clamp. And maybe we're going to see if we can just fly. Maybe it was the fact that the arms kept hitting into the fairing. But upon start, I realized that these arms are just have a mind of their own. They're not going to be of any use to us. So we cancel that test flight as well. And it seems to be somewhat stable so far, so I go ahead and go inside the cockpit, and then immediately hear the Kraken attack us once more. So this is not looking good. I was not very hopeful for the space station. I'm starting to think that I'm going to have to just do it in many different launches. Yeah, look at that. That doesn't seem stable. Yep, so we cancel that. And keeping in mind that every test flight costs us money. So I decided to give up on these arms. And we're just going to plan to create a secondary module to send those up and attach them later on. Then I realized I should probably name these docking ports. That'll help me out in the long run later when I have to start aiming for particular docking ports. I can choose which one instead of having to guess at which docking port we're selecting, because they're all named docking port. So I named them based on what's going to be attached there. As a reminder, we are going to have a lander that's going to go down to the surface of the Mun and rendezvous back. We're going to have an escape pod. We're going to have an extra fuel tank. We're going to have a space camp, a 23-seater that's going to attach there. And then we're also going to send up life support supplies. So now that I've taken off the arms, already I can see that we're doing much, much better. And we're using MechJeb to automate the gravity turn, and I'm very pleased to see that it's actually holding very well. We do have some struts that are hanging off the side. Those were left over from when we strutted the arms themselves, and so we're going to have to remember to take those off before our flight. They're not actually causing any problems right now, but there's no point in having them, and so we don't want to launch our space station with useless parts on it. So we drop our lower boosters and we complete the turn. Look at that. Going very smooth, with the exception of some heating aspects because we are going fairly fast. I would say that this is a perfect textbook launch. I was getting worried with just how bright our craft was getting, but I mean that is what you get when you are peeling through the atmosphere at over 1,000 meters per second. But MechJeb takes over and controls our ascent, and it kills our throttle as we're going up through the atmosphere. And that proves to me that we can make it to the atmosphere and we have enough fuel to circularize. So I think it might be time to actually run this for real. I do throw a reaction wheel in there to give it a little more oomph in its turn. And I also throw on some solar panels and some radiators. These radiators are a little too big. I didn't like that, so we throw on some small ones. But just to have, and we're gonna need to have some sort of electricity production. So some solar panels back there aren't gonna be, they won't hurt basically. And we still are gonna throw up those modules with the solar panels and communication dishes, because we're going to need a lot more power. We're going to need to be able to communicate with the KSC, but we don't need those right now. So I go ahead and switch around the seats. I put 2 scientists in the mobile processing lab, a pilot in the control center, and our engineer gets to sit in the cupola and get a nice view of our takeoff. I also increased the spare parts because we are using Dang It, and if something goes wrong, we're going to want to use it. And then we also throw on some communication dishes here because it didn't have anything without those arms. So even though we're going to send up more later, let's just have some on it to start off with. We throw an explosive device on the lower stage because this is definitely going to take us into orbit, where if we didn't put an explosive device, we would create a bunch of space trash that way. So I go ahead and check our life supplies, and we have more than enough. Way more than enough. So let's get to launching. We are now launching for real. We spent 110,000 credits on all those tests, so we better hope to make some money back soon. But the good thing is that we have a contract to launch the Kerbal Space Station as well as a MUN space station, and once this finishes its time requirements, I believe it's 2 or 3 days it needs to be in a stable orbit, we'll get a bunch of money from that. And then once we launch our space camp, we'll get some money from that, as well as a couple new Kerbals to fly, a pilot, an engineer, and a scientist by the end of that. So that's nice. And then once we complete the station, we get our lander on it, we get our escape pod, all that stuff, the extra fuel. We're going to send this to the MUN and make even more money from that as well. And depending on how much fuel we have, how well this has been going on, we may actually send it to Midmiss as well, because we do have a couple contracts to gather some science from Midmiss. And I mean, most people say that these space stations in Kerbal are pretty useless, but I feel like we can make some use out of them. So the cupola has a weird IVA, but interesting enough, and so we're not going to utilize it very much. We're going to do a lot of the controlling from here, which isn't ideal because we only have one Kerbal in this cam, and that means that he has to lean over pretty far to access the other seats buttons. But we also have the support of ground control. Since we have a probe core on it, we can use the probe core control room, and that'll just be nice to have a little extra support. So now, let's launch. Once again, we are using MechJeb to automate the flight. We're actually going to be using MechJeb a lot when it comes to the space station, and we're going to see how different crafts are able to automate their approach, their docking, all sorts of stuff. So, very excited about that. So we start our gravity turn and get to see the world start spinning beneath us. And everything's looking good. Yeah, see, I have to lean over pretty far to access that control panel over there. It's not my favorite IVA control room or control pod, but we do what we can with what we have. The lander can is the Alcor pod, which is the important one it's the most advanced one, and so it's utilized well, I think. We also, on the escape craft and the space camp bus, we're using the Mach 3 command pod, and that's also a fairly advanced one, so we just have to put up with this command pod for this flight, basically. And I changed the apoapsis height, or the full orbit height, to 150 as opposed to the standard 100 that it has. I really wanted to make sure that I had enough room for docking maneuvers. It's never a good thing when you're trying to kill your relative velocity and then you end up in a collision course back through the atmosphere just because you're trying to slow down enough. So having it at a little extra height is always good. So we're just rising through the atmosphere for now. Mike Jeb has already killed our engine, or kills our engine right there actually. And we're just going to coast until we get through the atmosphere, and then you will see a maneuver placed for our circularization. The heat starts to calm down a little bit. And we have made it through the worst of it. Now all we have to do is circularize and have a good enough thrust to weight ratio that we don't pass our apoapsis and start falling back. And Mech Jeb takes care of all the time warping. Yep, as you can see there was our blue line that represents our maneuver. And our solar panels deployed automatically because we had that setting set on Mech Jeb, although I don't like that one. So we're going to fix that later on. But we also go ahead and extend our communication dishes and our radiators now that we are in the vacuum of space. So our craft is very slowly pitching over. It is quite a boat. It is not the most maneuverable thing, but thankfully we have enough time before a maneuver that we can just kind of ease on over. And once we get close to centering on our target node, Mech Jeb goes ahead and time warps for us to bring us closer to our maneuver. And it's very, very slow. The last few degrees of tilting that it needs just seems to take forever with Mech Jeb. But also, we're not using any RCS, we're just kind of using our reaction wheel to tip over, so can't really expect it to jolt. But there we are. We are now time warping, as opposed to physics warping. We are time warping towards the maneuver, and it will automatically fire when it needs to. And it fires. So now our last step for today's episode is just to circularize. Once we get into a stable orbit, that's all we really need to do with this craft for now. I did collect a little bit of science on the way up, and we are going to get our Kerbals, our scientists, started in the mobile processing lab so they can process that during the time that we're sending up all the other modules. In the next episode, we are going to send up our space camp. There's 14 Kerbals plus 3 crew, a scientist, an engineer, and a pilot. and they are going to spend 40 days orbiting. They're going to spend 40 days orbiting Kerbin before they come back home. And the idea is hopefully we can rendezvous with the space station and they can enjoy all the amenities that it has to offer. So we made it. We are in a stable orbit, 150 kilometers above the surface. And our scientists are so excited and getting ready to do some science. But anyways, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward to more space station building. If you did, please consider dropping me a like, give me a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.